Well, good morning, everyone. At least it's morning for us, and it's morning for us in the United States on the day after the presidential election in 2020, and we have no idea yet who is the winner. So we are going to have an interesting conversation. I am Dr. CarrieLynn Reinhard of Dominican University, and I am the editor for the Popular Culture Studies Journal. As part of my job, I like to look for new ways to bring popular culture scholars together and talk about topics related to popular culture and to the study of it. And what we're hoping to do is maybe have this be the first of a series of similar types of dialogues and salons and conversations about topics that matter in regards to popular culture. Today, because of the election in the United States, but also because this is a rather interesting consideration about popular culture, one that goes back to the MPCA-ACA conference we just had in October, we're going to be talking about the relationship between popular culture and democracy. So joining me are a number of notable academics in various stages of their career in the United States and in Europe, so representing different Western democracies and experiences with democracy. So I'm going to have each one introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about themselves. So we're going to start with, to my left, I don't know if it looks like right on the screen, but to Julia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Largent. I'm an assistant professor at McPherson College, which is in Kansas. I'm the managing editor for PCSJ, and CarrieLynn and I have worked several times together, including Midwest PCA and a couple other projects. So this is my cat Jenkins, because he decided to make an appearance, named after Henry Jenkins, because I'm a nerd. My research focuses on documentary and fandom studies, both separately and in tandem. So that's me in a nutshell.
Go over to this side. I'm not pointing anywhere really good. To Christopher, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Christopher Zysik. I'm a PhD candidate at Paderborn University in Germany. And my research interest is the combination of post-colonial theory and popular culture, or especially popular music. And I'm currently working on Kawaii Metal. That's a Japanese music genre, and I try to theorize it with post-colonial theory.
Yeah, I love baby metal, so I love that idea, and I want to hear more about what you're finding.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Christopher. We'll go down to below you to Melanie.
All right. Hi, my name is Melanie Schiller. I'm assistant professor for popular music and media studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I did my PhD research about German popular music and national identity, but I'm currently working in a project about, it's called Popular Music and the Rise of Populism in Europe. And I'm working on Sweden in that project. So we have 5 different countries in the project, and I'm responsible for Sweden. So I'm coming from a more political perspective right now, and I'm interested in, what I can see in Sweden is that right-wing populism is very much working as a fan culture. So that's sort of why I'm here and why I'm interested in this discussion.
Yeah, and that discussion of populism is really prevalent and really important to really dive into right now. And I don't think, at least in the United States, I'm not sure we've done it enough. So I'm glad to know that type of research is happening over in Europe right now. Let's go down below me one step to Megan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Condis, and I am an assistant professor in communication studies in the USA at Texas Tech University. And my research focuses on video game culture and video game communities. So a couple years ago, I wrote a book called Gaming Masculinity, which was about gender and video game culture. And right now I'm working on a series of projects about white supremacist recruitment that goes on in online gaming culture and in gaming adjacent spaces like Steam and Discord. So sort of in line with what Melanie was talking about with her work and how not just like politics in the sense of like, I'm doing a politicized interpretation of this game, but like literal politics with, you know, groups who are trying to enter into these spaces to say, come join our explicitly political group.
Great, wonderful, thank you, Megan. Looking forward to hearing more about that too, or maybe not looking forward to is the right phrase, but then down to that side, let's go down to Laura.
Hi, well, first, I'm sorry I had to like go for a second. I just received a package, very good timing. So my name is Laura Alvarez Trigo. I'm a PhD candidate in Universidad de Alcalá in Spain. And my PhD thesis is not exactly related to this. I write about the reflection of media studies on postmodern American literature. But I've recently begun collaborating with some other people from my university and from other universities in a research blog on popular culture. And I'm managing, well, it's a very small project. We've just started. We're all, most of us PhD candidates, so it's not a huge thing, but I'm very excited about it. And I'm managing the section on new and digital media. So I've been looking a lot at online communities, of the whole issue with cancel culture and J.K. Rowling, and what Melanie and Megan mentioned about how these alt-right communities or right-wing communities work, kind of like fandom. I'm very interested in that as well. And I've been also looking into how the K-pop stan community did all these things during the Trump administration, and how that kind of fun community might be an interesting online space for successful activism, or not. Hopefully, yes, maybe.
Yeah, I know it, and I have a number of students in my fan studies class right now who are doing their mini ethnographies on K-pop, and they're really interested in looking at the impact K-pop fans are having. So I'm glad to hear more focus coming into that right now too. So I wanted to have this conversation because at MPCA we had a discussion about how to define popular culture and how to study it after 20-some, 30, 40 years now, I guess, of trying to work this through and to think about it. And I come out from outside of popular culture studies because I come from communication. That's been my focus. So when one of our participants was talking about how Ray Brown was looking at popular culture as important, necessary, related to democracy, that kind of like stopped me for a moment and made me think, wait a second, what is this? So I wanted to talk about that. I mean, what is the relationship between popular culture and democracy? And maybe what should the relationship be, if that's a good word too? So I don't really have any particular order for us to have this kind of conversation. But I mean, so just to start off, I mean, what is your thoughts about the current relationship between popular culture and democracy?
Can I go first? Or I don't really mind. So I think that, to me, what I think it's interesting between the connection of popular culture and democracy, it's accessibility, right? Especially nowadays with the internet. So I think it is more about the process of accessing that or having that connection with other people, or to dialogue, or to the opportunity for dialogue to form, rather than the object of culture in itself, right? Because if I think of popular culture, or what we usually think about popular culture right now, it's become very mainstream. So that's controlled, but these huge corporations, Disney, for example, which the article mentions, and I was like, are we sure Disney contributed to democracy? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not these big, huge corporations that are controlling everything that's produced in mass media. I think it's very problematic to say that's in itself contributing to democracy. I think it's right about the access that it has. And I just wanted to mention, this has nothing to do with the question, but I just wanted to mention that I take issue with the article saying, when it speaks about history and saying that history belongs to the people, and it says especially Americans, I take issue with that.
Yeah, and I mean, that article was written
In 90 something.
1997 or something, yeah. So it's quite old at this point, and it's definitely written more from an American cultural, American folklore approach as well. But yeah, I do think that issue about how the corporations are controlling popular culture, he did bring up this idea too about the difference between popular entertainment and popular culture. And I wonder if things like Disney are essentially producing popular entertainment, but maybe that's just one way of thinking about popular culture.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that. So, Laura, when you were talking, I was thinking about the term manufactured consent and how so much of our popular culture authorizes itself by at least pretending that it is kind of endorsed by numbers. Like I'm thinking about, this is an old example now, I guess, but like American Idol, where like a version of democracy is baked into the programming itself, as if to say, well, you sort of have to watch this show because otherwise you're not participating in the show, and it's the thing that everyone around the country is participating in. And the same could be said for like advertising campaigns that giant corporations run, where, you know, the sort of difference between something that arises from the populace versus something that is consumed by the populace gets blurry, especially with reality TV. I'm like, of all different flavors, where reality TV purports to be, you know, representatives from the population that get kind of like elevated up to be watched and to be a part of the big popular culture machine. And so, you know, what does that mean then as a model for how, at least with the US and democracy right now, we have this version of democracy where not everyone necessarily gets to participate in the same way, and certain voices get weighted more heavily than other voices. And that process of, it's democracy, but not really equal democracy, gets kind of reflected back to us by our media, and we maybe get used to that idea of, well, reality TV is sort of democratic, but not really democratic because only certain people get to participate. And so, yeah, it gets me thinking about how like this weird, warped, kind of corporatized version of democracy, we get taught to be accepting of it by the popular entertainment, and we start to think, oh, well, that is just popular culture.
Yeah, that's also an issue I came across. At first, I tried to define popular culture for myself, and I came to the conclusion that it's, or for me at least, a discourse to distribute power. And because in the article, I had the feeling it's dividing culture itself into popular culture and elite culture, and for me, it's not right to do that, because the elite is always dependent on the populace. So and they just, so power is distributed unevenly to create an elite, and that was my point. And this is also reflected in popular culture. So some have more power. That is, shown in the industry, for example. It's constituted in some point. So, but what connects democracy and popular culture for me was the choice, that you can choose between several things. So the elite has to adjust what the populace wants, or could adjust to it, so they keep their power.
Yeah, I would agree, really. I would also see popular culture as a discursive field where hegemony is negotiated. So I think that's the crucial point, that you see it as a negotiation and not a tool through which a message can be pressed and then it is received in the same way as it was intended on the other side. So that's like a very basic idea, of course. What I found a bit difficult, I could only read the beginning of the article because I joined last minute, but I found a bit difficult that popular culture was defined as both a general way of life, so everyday lifestyle, but also mass-produced entertainment. That was sort of all under the same head of popular culture. And I think it becomes very difficult to talk about popular culture and democracy if you have such a vague definition of what you are actually talking about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that idea of, because Christopher, one of the things we wanted to talk about at MPCA was that distinction. I mean, does it still make sense to talk about high versus low culture, elite culture versus popular culture, given how mainstream what we would consider popular culture to be? And for that, we would think maybe more the geeky and the nerdy and the fanny, okay, type things. But those are all still highly corporate controlled. And I liked the idea that he kind of gets at in the article about thinking of the more rural popular culture too, and thinking about it as being rural versus urban, and thinking about it as being these divides. But I don't know if those divides still work, or if the problem is the fact that there are divides. Because in a democracy, if you start having all of these divides, if you start having different popular cultures for different groups, creating different subjective realities on how to engage with the world and people in it, that's not going to be good for a democracy.
And I also think that corporations have used this divide to their advantage, right? This division between high and low culture. It's like, oh, so popular culture is low culture, and we kind of pander to people who think, oh, we are different, we're not, I don't know, I'm thinking, for example, about comics or the Marvel universe. It's like, oh, you can like comics, and this is not something that's just for kids, and kind of saying high culture forces you to be into this elitism that's clearly wrong, but the kind of the discourse that it creates is also kind of.
It actually makes me think, though, are those corporations or the elite, however we want to define that, by saying it's okay to like childish things, does it also still indicate a thought that that is still the child, that is still the lesser, the inferior, versus the elite gets to be seen, this is where the adults play. This is where the people in power who take responsibility play. And I wonder if we're still kind of enforcing that type of hierarchy, essentially.
Yeah, no, that is really resonating with me, because it makes me think about things like Comicsgate and Gamergate, where the elite ends up getting defined as, like, frankly, this like academic position. And that was striking me as I was reading the Brown article as well, this idea that, like, maybe what we used to define as like elite versus low culture assumed that like academics had this sort of intense power, and that we were like training people and like teaching them to like Shakespeare and Beethoven and whatever, and how, you know, that's not really necessarily where that sort of taste-making culture resides anymore, that it does sort of reside in corporations. And so to have a corporation like Disney say, don't worry, we're not going to judge you for liking this thing, unlike those academic elitists who all think that you're dummies for liking this thing. I think it is intentionally setting up a divide, but it's setting up this kind of artificial divide in the same way that, you know, politicians will be like, those latte sipping liberals all look down on your rural community or your, you know, taste culture or whatever it happens to be. And so, you know, I think one of the projects of academics who study popular culture has been kind of shifting from arguing amongst other academics that this popular culture is worthy of study, in which case we did make a lot of these like high versus low questions, because we were trying to argue to other academics like, no, please give me a job to look at this, or give me grant money to look at this, right? And so we had to like argue that it belonged in this like pantheon of canon texts, versus now I see pop culture studies pivoting to say things like, well, actually, we're trying to look at the rhetorics that have always been embedded in popular culture that was maybe happening just without us bothering to pay any attention to it, or that are happening by kind of putting on the cloak of democracy and, you know, mass distribution and leveling the playing field, but that are being deployed towards other ends, whether those ends are, you know, just corporate enrichment, or whether those ends are more kind of radical political ends that are being dressed up in order to make the populace kind of see themselves as being against academics or the elite or whatever it happens to be. That was very scattered, sorry, but it's just kind of like, oh, I'm seeing like from what Christopher said and what Laura said, and I'm like, grab it, grab it, grab it.
That made me start thinking about, is popular culture a place where the common good can be worked towards?
So it's interesting that you say that. So I was looking up a couple of years ago, when I teach a pop culture course every other year, and one of my first activities is to have my students define pop culture before we go into Ray Brown and kind of talk about how he brings in and how he defines pop culture. And so I found the Slido website that I used to capture that, and one of their responses is, quote, the most frequent way that society lives by. And I find that kind of striking and interesting. I don't remember the rest of the discussion we had that day because it was a year ago. But it's an interesting concept of applying it to democracy and that sort of thing. Of if, you know, if pop culture is what we live by, or the frequent way that society lives by, how does the high culture and the low culture play into that? If, you know, is that only the society that the low culture lives by, so then what does the high culture live by? If, you know, that sort of playing around with still that high-low as well.
But that's of course also exactly why popular culture is so interesting and fruitful for populists, right? Because it's a perfect way of claiming that they speak in the name of the people. So if you say that it's what the normal people live by as an everyday life experience instead of the corporation kind of popular culture, then that's a perfect means for them to express themselves in the style of popular culture, of how the people speak and how they behave and what kind of things they consume. And so that's why it's such a powerful combination. And that's exactly why I find it so difficult to say that popular culture is, what does he say? It democratizes society. And if you see it from the populist perspective, you could argue the opposite exactly.
Yeah, it makes me think here in the United States, ever since, well, really it's starting with Reagan, I think, every single president has had to go into their cowboy mode at some point to embody the American mythos of the rugged individual and essentially play into both the popular culture of the Western, but also the popular mythologization of what America is. And yeah, it's a populist appeal, essentially.
Maybe, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to say that populism doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. It can also be an empowerment. It can also, you're looking from Laclau or something, it can be a way of empowering the people as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be right-wing or negative, or let's just say it's a neutral concept in terms of how, if you want to analyze it academically. So we should keep that in mind, maybe. Sorry, Christopher.
No problem. Yeah, maybe we should also make a differentiation between pop culture and popular culture, because for me, popular culture is a more general term, so that incorporates all values of a society, and pop culture is just maybe the reflection on it, the products we see the values in, but it's already a negotiation process between the industry and the consumers. And yeah, that's my take on it.
I think that's important too, because I mean that term pop, I mean, pop music, pop artist, all of the ways that we think of it does have a different understanding to like the more folklore approach that at least Brown is talking about with popular culture, and the sense of with pop culture, you know, it has more of that ephemeralness. It just like comes and goes real quick. Like if it hadn't been for really Iron Man in 2008 doing as well as it did, I don't think we would have had the superhero genre and have it become as solidified into popular culture. Because until then, superhero movies were just kind of like these pop culture events. There was buzz around one when it came out, but then, you know, kind of just went away. Sorry about that. If that's a robocall, oh, I'm so tired of spam right now. Sorry. But I think that's an important distinction to make. What is pop versus popular?
Yeah, and that the folkloric approach that you're talking about makes me think about fan practices and how traditionally in pop culture studies, I think we talk about popular culture as like an action, like, or an activity. So it's, you know, performing fandom, it's writing fan fiction, it's doing cosplay, it's that kind of stuff. And how that it is very useful to separate that from the pop products that necessarily inspire it. So like it's different to, you know, buy every, you know, every movie in a series and keep it on a shelf versus to attend a convention and to dress up and to do a performance. And what I guess I think is a thing that's really been kind of consuming my attention recently is this idea that, how do I want to say this? So if fandom is this action, this like sort of this popular uprising, this way of people to kind of recapture and redeploy the things that corporations have put out there for us and to use them and to our own ends. So like, you know, the arguments about fan fiction starting with like Henry Jenkins forward, right? If that is the case, then what do we make of these efforts by corporations to kind of redirect or to drive those types of practices? So like contests that companies put on where they ask you to write a spec script that then if you win the contest, we now own your spec script and can make profit off of it. Or we're going to sponsor a convention and turn it from, you know, a gathering of fans into a giant spectacle where we release trailers for all of our movies and things like that. So, you know, how it becomes this cycle where something that maybe originated as just sort of like a popular practice that people were doing on their own without any kind of pushing from any corporate interest into something that's been kind of recaptured by capital and become, you know, just another extension of the studio system or of the publisher or of whoever's in charge.
Yeah, one of the first big projects I did was looking at the Dark Knight marketing and the Cloverfield marketing, and going back to Dallas Smythe talking about audience as commodity and how basically the audience was something that television studios or television networks would measure, commodify, sell so that they could make money. Whereas now with these types of co-optations of fandom, you're looking at essentially the audience as pusher idea, and having the audience be engaging in this free labor in order to further your own profit. And apparently fans seem to be okay with that. But it also then makes me think in terms of the politics and going back to like even with populism. That's kind of what politicians do, isn't it? That's kind of like how politicians use their constituents and their voters in a sense.
Well, it's certainly not democratizing. It's not empowering. No.
Like, Melanie, what are you finding when you look at the use of popular culture in politics in Sweden? What are you seeing in that regard?
I'm seeing that the party itself, especially the party leader, they work as popular culture itself. So they're not just using popular culture, but they function as popular culture. So people, for instance, once a year they organize a summer festival. The summer festival will have music performances. It will have some folklore dance practices where you can learn traditional dances and so forth. But the people that are met there, so people that will vote for the party, that are members of the party, they are talking about the party leader as they are fans of them. They take pictures, they collect autographs. They were very happy to show me all the pictures they took together, the selfies that they have on the phone. Also, the party leader is playing in a band himself, and they gave autograph sessions and meet and greets, and it's just purely functioning as pop culture. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And that's also why we're having this discussion on Twitter right now. Why do people start to become fans in the first place? So what draws them to something to become fans? That then might either be democratic or not democratic, I don't know. In my case, maybe not so much, but that's a matter of definition, I guess. But saying that popular culture in general is democracy and democratizes, I think, is very problematic.
Yeah, and I think this kind of populist practices in politics have been working like this for a really long time. Like as you said, since Reagan in the U.S. or I'm thinking of examples in Latin America, like this very populist, like Uribe in Colombia. Like he used to go to these little towns and be with them and dance with them and talk to them, and then there's like people who have, there was this really funny instance where a woman who had been a minister for him had a huge painting behind her when they were interviewing her, and it was Uribe, but like looking like Jesus Christ. And this is precisely what you said. It's like he is the object of fandom, right? That works exactly like this.
And not to be too US centric, but it gets me thinking about Donald Trump as a figure who rose to popularity kind of explicitly by saying, oh, don't worry, I'm not a politician, I'm a celebrity. There's a flag that flies in my neighborhood that's a Trump 2020 flag that says, it says Trump 2020, the sequel, like as if you're participating in a series of movies as opposed to participating in politics. And so that also gets me thinking about how politics uses pop culture to disavow its politicalness, to try to present itself as, you know, not actually a part of some sort of political process, but just, you know, an expression of taste or an expression of emotion, an expression of community, as though, I mean, of course, as academics, we would poke our heads in and be like, all of those things are political, but you know, like, and again, like I come back to like video games and how in video game culture, there's this motto of like, keep politics out of our video games. And often the way that one does that is by just, you know, refraining from speaking about any particular candidate. So like that magically is like the prophylactic that says this is a politics free zone. But then the games that you play are about, you know, Call of Duty. It's about being a military person who goes into a country and performs a Black Ops mission, or it's about, you know, Watch Dogs, about hacking into a government server. And so it's like the politics is all there, but the popular culture part of it allows you to disavow that it's politics. And so you get to have the fun of participating in this inherently political thing, but, you know, get to, again, like Laura, I think, was the one who brought up like the figure of the child. You get to retain a childlike innocence of, well, I didn't mean it to be political, and I didn't say Trump or Biden, so therefore I'm innocent.
Hey, LOL, just doing it for the laughs. It's all about the lols. Yeah.
Up to the point where, I'm sorry, one more thing. Up to the point where like, so again, I said my research was about like explicit neo-Nazis and white supremacists who will say, come to like Stormfront, the neo-Nazi home on the internet where we have one of our forums is dedicated to gaming, because that's a place where you can talk about gaming without politics interfering. It's like, it's Stormfront. The politics are already here, but somehow that construction of, well, you know, we're the space that's so, you know, out of the main line and so like away from attention, that this is going to be the place where you can finally be free of politics amongst us neo-Nazis. It's very bizarre.
It makes me think too, Megan, about that idea I remember we also had in Fan Studies Network, that if you were to go to some voters, or in Melanie, I don't know if this would happen in Sweden too, if you were to go to these political party members and whatnot who were engaging in fandom and called them fans, how would they react to that? And part of it that we discussed was that affective aspect. Is there's still the sense that democracy is supposed to be the rational, logical type of engagement. And yet, over and over again, we see the affective aspects of it. And is that also then where popular culture comes in, because it allows for the acceptance of the affect?
But would that imply that the call it explicitly political would be without affect? Because I mean, that's what politics is about as well, right? Maybe we can't make that division in the first place. I don't know what the Sweden Democrat voters that I talked to would say if I called them fans. I was supposed to go to this festival in the summer, but obviously it didn't happen. So I couldn't check. Hopefully I can check next year, we'll see. But Megan, what you said about calling yourself unpolitical or apolitical for using popular culture is exactly what's happening as well. So this festival, organized by a political party, presents itself as non-political. We're just here to have a party, we're just listening to our favorite music, and everyone is celebrating their non-politicalness while, I don't know, wearing t-shirts that say fuck hip-hop or something, and everyone knows what that means. So yeah, the whiteness is all over it, but no one even has to say it. It's very powerful in the sort of implicit shared understanding of who we are, what we stand for. We are the people with this kind of this kind of popular culture that binds them together, and without even having to say it, excludes other people from that group, of course.
Yeah, and I think that the effect is precisely about that. What Melanie said is who you are, right? And this is where fandom ties in. It's because it's ingraining your identity. That's the important part. Like when you invest so much in something that you identify with, and it works both ways. It can be democratizing, and it can be the total opposite of that, because it becomes who you are.
Who are we? We are the kind of people who like X, right?
And that very often goes with this kind of underdog position as well, right? So in populism, that's more explicit, of course, but in other fandoms, that's very much like we're the outside group, we're the weirdos. Maybe no one's taking us seriously. We have our own language. No one listens to us. Surely that's something that all of you find in your own researches as well.
Yeah, and it's funny with the co-opting of fandom, how many fandoms were super mainstream right now, and I'm even saying fandoms that I'm part of do this. How you still think that you're so special for liking Harry Potter, and it's like, yeah, no, you're not.
Yeah, true.
And there is that aspect coming in about, you know, feeling like the underdog, feeling like the outsider. And we see that then in the gatekeeping and in the ways in which fandoms and cultures will, you know, further fracture and separate themselves out based on, okay, well, we're getting even narrower and narrower concentrations of specific types of identity then at that point. And people are able, with the internet and with so much text out there these days, we're able to find some popular culture text, some popular culture that provides us the space to get that really narrowed down sense of what is our taste culture or what is the values that we have.
And that's where I really want to hear about the metal stuff. Because when you said like you have a subculture that becomes these like you have like this version of metal and this version of metal. So I would love to hear more about, what did you say it was called, Kawaii Metal, Christopher?
Yes.
Can you talk to us about that? I'm so curious.
Yeah, it's a combination of, so it's a metal genre and it combines metal music with elements of cuteness. And in Japan, you have the kawaii culture that is very prominent there. And it's kind of mainstream. You see it in anime, manga, and so on. But also in the everyday life. So it's not really institutionalized or aestheticized, I would say. But it's always there. They use the word kawaii for very different things that are not specifically cute. And it's kind of interesting since because the idol music uses this concept very broadly, and it's dominating the music charts and the music culture in Japan, and the metal genres and the combination of it. I see it as a counterculture to it, or counter movement, because at the same time, or at least a decade earlier, all female rock bands started to rise in Japan, from rock bands and to metal bands and so on. And I think it's a logical result to combine both to undermine the mainstream. Because I also heard they fill stadiums in Japan, but it's not mainstream. So it's kind of interesting. They don't appear in the charts very prominently, these bands. It's more of an underground type of thing. But there's also these underground idols. They are also specifically idols that don't use metal music, but they are underground. And it's kind of interesting that there are several underground movements against this mainstream of, let's say, the AKB48 or the whole 48 group system that dominates the charts. They have in the yearly charts 9 or 8 out of 10 songs are there in the top 10 million sellers, and there's no. And I also talked with some people, and they also feel like this kawaii culture doesn't represent Japan, because there's also this idea of politicians to sell Japan in this kind of image to the outside world, where kawaii culture is used, for example, Hello Kitty and Pokemon and so on. And some Japanese think it's not a good representation of Japan to the world. So this counter movements in the musical sense are showing the values that appear in the society against what is mainstream.
I'm wondering, maybe this is not so much related, but because I was thinking about it when I was looking at K-pop, because they have kind of the same thing with aegyo. I'm probably butchering the word, I don't know how to say it, but it's the same thing as kawaii in Korean. And there's this generalized, I feel like, appeal to cuteness in popular culture that's very widespread in, say, the cartoon style, or cartoons that are what we were saying before, that are not made for kids, right? So I was wondering if this is also kind of connected to let's say the fact that these things as K-pop and the Japanese kawaii-ness, it's becoming more popular. Does it have something to do with what we were talking about of the making popular culture more childlike in the way that it's equated to lower culture, kind of. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. I'm just connecting ideas, but
I think it's the aesthetic of cuteness is, in my opinion, nothing new, since, for example, Walt Disney and the whole Disney universe also is based on this idea of cuteness. And there are also in Western culture a lot of examples of cuteness in popular music and popular culture. For example, in Germany, there was also, when I was a child, a mouse. It's called Diddle, and it was also like a cute version of a mouse, and people bought it, especially children. So I think it has a lot of the literature I read about it is very connected to a industry critique, and because cuteness has this appealing effect, and there are some also psychological studies on cuteness, like it is inherent in the human being, and there are also some so the connection between parent and child, and it's because the child is cute that the parent cares for it, and otherwise, or even anthropological thesis about it, that we humans are just a cute version of apes. So in the evolutionary sense, since our appearance is more closely connected to an ape child than adult ape. So there's also this connection of cuteness that we really is present in everyday life and in the human history itself, that is not really present, or also not really researched enough.
yeah, that's very interesting. I was wondering if, like, for example, because this is not my field study whatsoever, but I see that maybe Disney, if it were like 60 or 70 years ago, it will, as you said, target children, but now it's business, right? So they realize, as you said, that we like cute things. So it's like, oh, let's go sell it to adults as well. And that's, I think that's part of how, so part of what we were saying before, maybe, that it's less democratizing because the corporations are kind of appropriating all these things that they realize that people like. It's like, people do fandoms, let's take advantage of the transformative fandom, or let's take advantage about the fact that people like cute stuff.
Yeah, that's what I meant in the beginning when I said the elites are dependent on the people, because they just try to pander to the values the people have. So if more adult people are starting to like cute things instead of only children, so they pander to this new upcoming value. And then we have also the connection to democracy, that the people can choose whatever product they want, and the elite shifts to that new value.
Well, the choice of products is maybe not as free, though. I mean, Disney will have more capital to make the products available to you than other ones will. I mean, it's not a democratic field that has, equal choice.
Yeah, but with pop culture products, I would say you still have the choice of not buying it. So
I was also wondering
but
about.
Then you're risking, though, right? I'm sorry. If you don't buy it, then you're risking being having the label applied to you as being like, well, now you're not part of our in-group. And it got me thinking about, like, what if the values that are being pandered to are inherently undemocratic values, like they're racist or sexist or trans exclusionary styles of values. If those get built into popular culture in like a marketplace of ideas sense, like, well, we're just going where the money happens to be then you start to have kind of this mutually reinforcing anti-democratic popular culture that says, well, you know, if you were a part of our nation or a part of our community or a part of our in-group, then you would enjoy this pop culture. And the fact that you don't enjoy it because it's directly exclusionary of you and who you are and how you identify is just further proof that you're not part of our community or of our nation or whatever it happens to be.
I wouldn't agree with that because, as I mentioned, we have to make the difference between pop culture and popular culture. And I would say if you stop buying it, you're still part of a society and you are producing a new value for the discourse. And then it's up to the other people if they want to pander to your new created value that you are giving into the discourse. And then you create some counter power, and then a new negotiations will come into place.
Yeah, I also think about like with millennials and Generation Z, in the sense of how much of their popular culture is not coming just from like Disney and places like that, but also from these individuals who haven't had those connections to more elite industry practices, but were able to create a brand and create a successful brand for themselves because of YouTube and now Twitch and places like that as well. The extent to which those places are perhaps reifying certain oppressive and not exactly democratic values, of course, is something else to discuss as well. But there is that potential now because of the internet to be able to find all of these other sources of pop culture text that then through fan practices could become a larger popular culture.
That is true on the one hand, but on the other hand, those platforms are usually also owned by corporations that are using the data that is produced by those people that are supposedly offering countercultural expressions. So it remains an unequal game. And by saying that just not consuming is not a very strong position to offer counter narratives in a society.
And on these platforms, you also partly what Melanie said, and also you end up also pandering to your once you create a platform, you know, it's not, and you buy things as Megan said for in-group approval. Like there's everything. I don't know. I think to a certain extent, choice is a fiction. You always do things because you know people are gonna perceive them a certain way, right? Like everything, almost everything that you buy, it's part of this sense of identity. Even if you do it in private, there's a certain sense of identity and a certain connection that you still build with others, right?
I didn't want to say that not buying is some kind of agency. It's just an example that popular culture has the possibility or this democratic characteristic of choice. It's just an example. So.
But maybe that's an interesting issue to argue, right? So if we were saying that maybe access and choice is what makes popular culture democratizing, maybe considering whether choice is a real thing that exists, it's what makes it, it makes it possible or not for popular culture to be democratizing, really.
Or is it even possible then to actually have democracy? I'm also looking at the
sorry,
title,
that was
yeah,
a very depressing comment.
So let's
sorry,
end it
I'm
there,
sorry.
everybody.
That's not a good, I'm sorry. I forgot what was happening in the US, guys.
But no, I do think those types of fundamentals are really important because I do, and I'm of course talking from a United States perspective here, but I do think in the United States we have this myth of democracy. And I don't know how prevalent that is in other democracies around the world. But I think we have this sense that, you know, all I got to do is I got to vote for my representative, and that representative will go off and do what I want him to do. And they're pandering to people. And but then the more people think about how politicians are just pandering to them, the less they're engaging in politics. And so it just worsens the entire democratic process for whatever the intentions were in the beginning. So I think we do have to question these things and to break through the mythologization that we've had.
And I think just to maybe, if I may boldly try to synthesize what we've been talking about, I think I agree that pop culture is a field upon which negotiation is possible, and that, you know, it is a tool that we can use in order to try to, you know, speak back to systems of power. But also, as Melanie said, it's not a completely, you know, free to use tool, and it's a tool that we have to use like very judiciously and very carefully, because it's so easy for it to be co-opted. And, you know, it sort of becomes frustrating because, you know, you just want to say, oh, well, don't worry, we'll just set up our popular culture, like kind of like with our vote, right? We'll just set it up to do this. Resistance will be valorized and everything will be great. But it's this sort of constant revisiting and renegotiating and reevaluating, and you know, and that's where like the reality of democracy butts up against the myth of democracy, right? Like, you don't just set up the democracy and have everyone sign the Constitution and be like, we did it, we're done. Like, but it has to be this continual thing where you continue to participate in it all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's something for scholars in popular culture or other fields as well that focus on issues of cultural and social matters, is the fact to remember nothing is ever set, it's always co-constructed, and it's always in flux, which makes it immensely complex and annoying, but also fertile as a field. And there's a lot of different things we can do, but we have to be willing to do them. And what this has helped me with this morning is knowing that there's people out there willing to do this harder scholarship and willing to look at these things. So I'm really happy. And as the editor of the Popular Culture Studies Journal, I would love to publish any of this.
Well, thank you so much for creating this forum, and for, you know, I've been kind of following as you at your journal have been experimenting with these, you know, different ways of presenting scholarship. And, you know, I think that's really important too, like not just all publishing journals behind, or journal articles behind paywalls that fans and people participating in popular culture can't get at, but doing these alternate mediums. That I think it's really phenomenal, and I just really appreciate you guys pulling this stuff together.
So much. And we are at 10 o'clock. I haven't had breakfast yet, so I kind of would need some food at this point. And I know a number of you are probably in need of supper at this point, or dinner. So I want to thank everyone for coming today and having this conversation. I think this was a really fruitful conversation, and hopefully we can keep it going in comments and in social media and in our work and in conventions. And again, this will be the first of hopefully a series of similar conversations. So if you ever have a topic that you'd like us to talk about, if there's a academic piece or even a critical journalist piece or whatever that you'd like us to respond to because it brings up thoughts regarding popular culture, like I want to get more into this whole idea of quantity versus quality and pop versus popular, things like that, let us know. We're glad to have these conversations.